So just like that, Elden Ring is completely forgotten.
That's right, the game that completely took over the internet with its DLC earlier this year has been completely forgotten. Brought to you by the internet's biggest Nintendo fanboy and certified Elden Ring hater, Harmon Smith. You may recognize this lad from a bunch of other videos I've done, but perhaps you remember this one from about a year ago. Well, another year has gone by, many moons have passed, and he's still at it. Because here we are with a video from 7 days ago simply titled Elden Ring Has Been Forgotten, which I find to be a really fun title because in the 7 days before he uploaded this, he had uploaded 5 other videos about, you guessed it, Elden Ring. Those being Elden Ring Scarlet Rot is a blatant ripoff of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's Malice, Elden Ring fanboys cope and seethe when hardcore gamers don't like their games, Elden Ring is not the biggest new media property of the 2020s, Elden Ring is boring, and YouTubers worship Elden Ring for views. And guess what? In the 7 days between him uploading this video that we're watching right now, and me starting my video that we're watching right now, he uploaded another 4 Elden Ring videos. Those being Elden Ring fanboys use guides to get through the game for the first time, Punch-Out Wii is more difficult and far superior to FromSoft's Elden Ring, Elden Ring 100% could run on Nintendo Switch, and Elden Ring fanboy claims Nintendo Switch can't run open world games like Breath of the Wild. So, if anyone has forgotten Elden Ring, it hasn't been you. But let's see what you have to say this time.
People will keep making their little YouTube videos.
You bet they will.
They'll keep making their lore speculation videos, and it's all going to get dropped when the sequel comes out.
Well, yeah, that's the point of speculative videos. You're speculating about something that hasn't happened yet. You can't really speculate about something that's already happened unless you have historically slow internet. Also, if people are making lore videos and speculating about things, doesn't that mean the game isn't forgotten? Like, doesn't that mean the complete opposite?
Right? It's all going to be the same thing all over again. And much like with Dark Souls, much like with Demon Souls, you are going to see this major drop-off of established fans who just begin to realize that there is no innovation, there is no change, there is no evolution.
Apparently there was no change or evolution from Demon Souls to Dark Souls, and presumably from Dark Souls to Elden Ring, like... Presumably that's the point you're making, that these games are all the same. And sure, there's similarities between all of them, and there's things that carry over from one to the next, but that's kind of what happens when all of these games share a genre that FromSoft started. And as long as each new installment feels unique from the last and offers a substantial amount of new content and new gameplay opportunities and experiences, that's really all you can ask for, right? And From Software absolutely cooks from game to game. You may think the core gameplay of the Souls-like genre is played out, and to some extent I agree with that, but to suggest that FromSoft's games are all the same, it's just plainly wrong. Each of FromSoft's Souls-like games heavily build upon the last. The new ideas aren't always fantastic, but that doesn't mean they're not there. All of FromSoft's Souls-like games feel extremely distinct from one another.
Like Elden Ring is the same thing it's always been since Demon Souls, right?
No, not right.
Not right.
Not right?
That's right.
Over and over and over again. Like, FromSoft is going to be seen for the fraudulent, uncreative, rehashed hacks that they are.
Maybe one day, except usually you have to be that thing before you're seen as that thing, which not only is FromSoft extremely consistent with their quality, but they're also led by a bunch of absolute chads that the rest of the AAA industry should really be taking notes from.
It is going to be great to see. And I would like to think back to the mid-2000s where, you know, games like Mass Effect and Portal.
I love watching you struggle to name games from this era. Like we all know that you don't actually play games, but it's nice to have that repeatedly confirmed for us.
BioShock were hyped up to similar levels of Elden Ring.
Yeah, and they were all good games. It's hard to tell objectively who was hyped up to what degree. I don't really agree with the idea that flippin' Portal was hyped to the level of Elden Ring. Like, I was gaming during this time that you're describing, and I just don't recall that happening. But yeah, the gaming industry tends to hype games that are really good and have the AAA company logos on the box. This isn't new.
Right. These were the games that were pushed as being like these major innovators, these huge phenomenons, like
because they were
the defining moments in gaming culture. Oh, these are the best games coming out right now.
Well, you named 3 games that actually were 3 of the best games coming out at the time they were coming out, so I don't really know what the point of this section is.
Like, I remember like watching X-Play in 2007 and just being confused at like all the games they were talking about. Like,
Games are confusing, I know.
none of this stuff looks good, right? Like, the PlayStation 360 generation was a complete joke
Which is why basically everyone is nostalgic for it, right?
because game journals were throwing all their weight behind like trying to make games look serious and mature and sophisticated.
Which is different to today's AAA game lineup. How?
Like, and trying to like pass themselves off as like real auteurs of the medium. Meanwhile, real gamers like myself were playing almost exclusively on Nintendo consoles, right?
No, not right.
Not right. Not right. That's right.
Nintendo had a good run during the generation you're describing, but they also were not even close to being the main gaming platform for all of gaming, because during the time that you're describing, they consciously removed themselves from the running of being the main gaming platform for everyone. The Wii passed on the mature HD gaming trends and leaned into the casual base, and so did the Nintendo DS. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that by any means. I think the Wii was a fantastic system, and I think the mid to late 2000s were a great time for Nintendo all around. But it was also a great time for gaming in places other than Nintendo, which is why a lot of people were doing that. The mid to late 2000s were when gaming truly exploded into the mainstream thanks to HD graphics and more cinematic blockbuster style presentation for games. And this was also the era where what we think of today as the indie game scene really kicked off. It was a great time for video games on and off Nintendo platforms. And if you're upset about the fact that there were good games on non-Nintendo platforms during this era, you need to take that up with Nintendo because they're the ones that made things that way.
It is shocking how much better like something like Super Mario Galaxy is compared to all of the games that were actually being talked about.
Bro, Super Mario Galaxy was absolutely one of the biggest games being talked about. There's no way that we're about to pull the "man, nobody talked about it" card for fucking Super fucking Mario fucking Galaxy.
Around that period, right? Just it's kind of phenomenal how Super Mario Galaxy has still retained its relevancy, almost 20 years later.
But I thought you said nobody knew about it.
While, BioShock and everything else has just fallen by the wayside.
There's a new BioShock game in development right now that wouldn't be happening if there was no modern relevance for the franchise.
Right?
Not right.
Not right. Whoa.
Again, nobody looks back fondly on Fallout 3. Nobody looks back fondly on Skyrim. Nobody looks fondly back on the Mass Effect games or like anything.
Not to give too much attention to the worst arguments of all time, but it's hard to argue nobody cares about games like Skyrim in the current year when Skyrim averages over 17,000 concurrent players on Steam at any given time. Like, the fact that you even tried to make this argument is just kind of sad. I mentioned historically bad internet in the video earlier, but, I mean, you could be the first documented example of historically slow internet if you're actually trying to argue that nobody cares about Skyrim in the current year. And if the argument is that games that are popular at one point but then get less popular with time or become less relevant as time goes on and as people finish them and move on to other games, can't that be said about basically every single-player game ever? Like, what single-player game does that description not apply to? It's just such a weird point. It literally means nothing.
Right? Like, these games simply did not stand the test of time because without their huge game journalist hype cycle, they fundamentally don't have anything.
Again, you can absolutely apply this argument to literally any game that has ever been in the AAA spotlight. This is a non-point.
Right? If you go into Mass Effect, and without the game journals telling you that, like, oh, your choices matter, like, you'll realize very quickly that, like, your choices don't matter.
I mean, I've never been a huge Mass Effect guy. I keep telling myself I'm going to go through them at some point in the near future. I have them all on Origin. I just need to commit the time to them. But, like, even I know the choices do indeed matter in these games. Like, maybe not all of the choices, but your choices as a whole do in fact matter, yes.
Like, nothing you do really affects the plot in Mass Effect in any real way. And that, of course, led to Mass Effect 3 coming out, and that led to the ending, and that led to, like, the slow, gradual decline of EA as a whole, right?
EA was declining for other reasons. This is why I say you don't pay attention to anything that's not Nintendo. EA absolutely was declining during this time period, but it was for reasons completely unrelated to Mass Effect. 99% of the issues that people had with Mass Effect 3 fell on BioWare, not EA. And if you don't believe me, here's one of the game's lead writers confirming in 2021 that the shitty version of the Mass Effect 3 ending was the plan from the beginning. It was not the result of any kind of EA meddling or time constraints. It was exactly the way they planned it to be from the start. Mass Effect 3 got a lot of shit when it came out, but it really had nothing to do with EA, for once.
Again, Metal Gear Solid 4 was worshipped when it came out. Like, oh, 10 out of 10 masterpiece. And now it's looked back on as a joke.
MGS4 is a joke. That's literally the first time in my whole life I'm hearing this.
Right? I've seen YouTubers make damage control videos trying to justify like MGS4's popularity at the time.
Wait, like this MGS4? This one? This is the one we're talking about?
But the reality of it is just like the audience was just, willing to defend Kojima at all costs, right? It didn't matter that he had put out a bad game. It didn't matter that MGS4 was a step down from 3 in every way, shape, and form.
I genuinely feel like my world is breaking down a bit right now. I've literally never heard anyone say stuff like this about MGS4. And I admit MGS isn't really my cup of tea, so I'm pretty disconnected from people's general opinions on the franchise. So I guess it's possible that I just genuinely missed all this, but I've lived my whole life under the impression that people liked MGS4 and that people want it to not be stuck on the PS3 because they liked it. Am I missing something?
It didn't matter that the story made no sense and that the characters were mishandled and that the gameplay wasn't good.
Do I just need to pay more attention to things? I'm so confused right now. Hello, I'm interrupting this video to remind you that this channel is sponsored by 4D Gaming. If you would like a really nice mousepad, go to 4dgaming.com and use code Joe for a discount. This channel is also sponsored by Glitch Energy. It's basically G Fuel, but better, so go to Glitch Energy and use code Joe for a discount. Thank you for letting me interrupt your content. I'll let you keep watching it now.
Everything wrong with MGS4 was completely written off because, it's Metal Gear Solid, it's Hideo Kojima, he'll be making games forever.
Well, that part is probably true. Kojima's gonna make games until he's dead, and then he might make a few more after that.
Now he never produces anything relevant ever again after that. Rising wasn't good.
Bro, Metal Gear Rising fucks so unreasonably hard. Don't even start this with me.
The PSP games weren't good.
Yeah, I don't know anything about those.
Metal Gear Solid 5 wasn't good. Death Stranding wasn't good.
I mean, maybe not your cup of tea, but fucking come on. This is just lazy at this point. Let's make a new point. Move on. We started out talking about Elden Ring, and now we're talking about Kojima for some reason.
And again, we're still in this weird phase where people don't necessarily admit there was a drop-off, right?
I'm pretty sure the modern internet is very happy to point out drop-offs in literally anything.
Nobody wants to admit that there was a decline in quality. All they do is just move on to the next thing while screaming about how Nintendo is the one that's constantly falling off.
Well, that one is pretty true a lot of the time. A lot of Nintendo's main franchises have taken a dip in quality, as has Nintendo's general business practices. Not all of them, but some of them absolutely. When's the last time a really good Pokemon game came out, When's the last time Nintendo dropped a reasonably priced and reasonably upgraded re-release of something in their back catalog? Nintendo's not perfect. It'd be awesome if you didn't act like they were.
Right? I can't go on 4chan or YouTube at all without people screaming at me about how Breath of the Wild is one of the most disappointing Nintendo games I've ever played.
Wait, they're screaming at you specifically about that? 4chan is screaming at you specifically. Are you sure you didn't just say something stupid to provoke such things? Because 4chan is an anonymous forum site. You're not getting any fucking Breath of the Wild DMs on 4chan. No one's yelling at you specifically about anything on 4chan unless you step into the ring. That's how 4chan works.
Again, you can't look at something like that and take it seriously, right?
This dude went to 4chan and expected to see something he should take seriously.
If you're aware of what Zelda is, if you're a hardcore fan, if you've played these games to death, right? If you know everything about them, you can't look at a claim like that and take it seriously.
Right, so don't do that.
Right? Because it's so completely delusional. And I've talked about like all the allegations against these games before, the dungeon designs and the open world map and how it's not a real Zelda game, the weapon breakage thing.
I mean, I'm no Zelda aficionado, but I'm pretty sure the claims of Breath of the Wild not being a real Zelda game, like a traditional Zelda game, I feel like those claims are pretty accurate. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's still accurate. Breath of the Wild is doing something totally different than, say, Link to the Past, or Majora's Mask, or any of the other Zelda games that came before it. Fucking Four Swords Adventure. Objectively the best Zelda game of all time. These games don't play like Breath of the Wild. That's not an objectively bad thing, but it is an objectively true thing, and people aren't assholes for pointing that out.
Like, everything that has ever been brought up about the newer Zelda games, I've summarily debunked fairly quickly and easily, right?
I mean, maybe? You did the literal opposite just now, though.
But again, it's no matter what these games were like, people would come out and complain about them.
Welcome to the internet.
Right? Echoes of Wisdom is a really good example of that, where the game isn't even out yet. And you're already seeing people make all these weird claims about it. Like, oh, they disrespect the traditional puzzle structure of Zelda games. Like, this isn't what I wanted. Like,
God forbid somebody not want something Nintendo makes. What a crime they've committed.
They keep doing everything they can to try and, continue the narrative that the series has fallen off.
I don't think anyone actually thinks Zelda has fallen off. That would imply nobody cares about the franchise anymore, and that's obviously not true because a bajillion people have bought the last 2 installments. What you're describing here are people who want a new and more old-school Zelda game. There's nothing wrong with wanting that, because the last 2 mainline installments, meaning the last 7 years worth of mainline Zelda games, have been open world. And fucking everything is open world these days. It is not a sin to want a non-open world Zelda game.
In some way. And it simply isn't true. It never has been true. Like, this series has been consistently top tier since its inception in 1986.
Especially Four Swords Adventure, the best Zelda game.
Right? We got good... We've gotten good sequels, good spin-offs, a good evolution of the Zelda franchise. Like, it is undoubtedly the best video game franchise of all time.
Wrong. That's Time Crisis. Time Crisis is a better franchise than Zelda. Okay, can we all just go confuse the shit out of Harmon Smith for a day? Like on August 5th, I want you all to go to Harmon Smith's comment sections and talk about how much you love Time Crisis. Nobody be mean, nobody argue with him, nobody harass him. Everyone be completely and utterly polite to everyone in the threads. But let everyone know how much you love Time Crisis and how much Time Crisis changed your life. I just want to confuse the shit out of everyone on that channel. August 5th is now National Time Crisis Day.
Right? And what do you do? What do you do? What do you see the audience do? Oh, Elden Ring is the real masterpiece. Like, come on.
You're just so good at arguing your points. I totally agree with you that Zelda is better than Elden Ring because you told me that's the way things are and never elaborated. It's awesome. It's all the media's fault. It's all the media's fault. It's just that journalists are telling me what to think, and that's why I'm not the biggest Zelda fan in the world. I mean, I thought Zelda games just weren't really my kind of game, but I was wrong. It's the journalists' fault. They told me to like Elden Ring more. Also, I just realized that, the joke's over now. I just realized something. You're actually trying to make the argument that Zelda doesn't get enough journalist attention. That's actually what you're trying to do right now. Zelda is one of the most overly covered franchises and positively covered franchises in the entire industry, but you're suggesting that the only reason people think about other games more than Zelda is because Zelda doesn't get enough media attention, and for no other reason. This is incredible. Elden Ring came out 2.5 years ago. You gotta move on.
It's like The Sopranos. It's over. Find a new show.
Come on. You are embarrassing yourselves, right? Again, 10 years from now, Elden Ring's not even going to be on, anyone's radar.
Well, according to you 5 minutes ago, Super Mario Galaxy isn't on anybody's radar in the current year. So I'm not sure what you mean by this?
Right. Already, after the release of the DLC, like people are starting to see through like the lore speculation and just the
Oh, we saw through the lore speculation with the release of the DLC. Yes, that's because the DLC came out. We can't speculate about it anymore. It's here.
and just the game as a whole. Like it just isn't all that well written, engaging, or interesting, right?
Even if you're right, that's not the most important thing about a video game. Fucking hot take, I know, but some people just like fun gameplay. Excuse From Software for consistently delivering on that aspect.
For all the talk that people have about like how Tears of the Kingdom had disappointing lore, I think it's safe to say that like Elden Rings in the long term will not stand the test of time.
So you're not even trying to argue that people's criticisms of Zelda are unfounded. You're just redirecting to Elden Ring. That's an incredibly odd strategy.
As Zelda's has had, right? It isn't going to have reoccurring elements. It isn't going to have like iconic video game iconography. Like it isn't going to have memorable moments.
Nobody will remember anything from Elden Ring. Ever. They just won't. Never mind the stuff that people already remember. That stuff's not real. Nobody will remember. Yeah, no, whatever you say, Coach. Whatever you say.
Like, again, like in a lot of ways, Tears of the Kingdom, I think, has kind of established itself as a favorite of mine. Like there are so many moments in Tears of the Kingdom that are just, I think, will go down as some of the greatest ever.
I mean, I'd love to show you my favorite moment from Tears of the Kingdom. Here, I'll show you.
And yet, like, people like to, but it was so cool when you went through the castle and fought the boss. Like, no, it's it doesn't match up at all.
Going through castles and fighting bosses in Elden Ring, bad. Going through castles and fighting bosses in Zelda, muy bien, muy bien.
Like, no matter how much you like try and like hype the game up as a religious experience, like the reality is what's going to happen is that you are simply going to get bored of Elden Ring and move on to something else.
Hey, remember last time you played a game for a whole bunch of hours and eventually you saw all that you wanted to see of it and moved on to a new game? Not because there was anything wrong with the game that you had just been playing, but just because you were finished with it? Yeah, actually, you did that because the game sucked. You were supposed to play that game for the rest of your life, and if you ever stopped playing, it's because the game sucked.
Meanwhile, Zelda fans are going to find new ways to value and appreciate Zelda forever.
I mean, people are still finding new ways to value and appreciate the Dark Souls games. And Bloodborne is rapidly making its way into the hands of modders and emulators, so that's going to unlock a whole bunch of new opportunities for that game and its community. But okay, let's just round this out, I guess. We're getting close to the end. That'll make it 2 Harmon Smith response videos in a row where I actually make it all the way to the end. I think.
Breath of the Wild is still being played today.
So is Elden Ring.
Tears of the Kingdom is still being played today.
So is basically every FromSoft game.
Meanwhile, Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring are just completely forgotten. Like, even at this early stage.
Okay, fine. I was resisting this, but let's just go to the Steam charts. Elden Ring is currently averaging over 200,000 concurrent players on PC alone at any given time. And Baldur's Gate 3, since you decided to bring this up, on PC alone is averaging around 67,000 concurrent players. Again, at any given time.
Right? Like, it's one of those things where this is the last stand of anti-Nintendo sentiments in the industry.
Last stand? The fuck happens next? Like, do I just catch on fire if I don't buy a Switch in the next 6 months? Like, what the fuck happens next? What the fuck do you mean last stand?
Where they worship everything that comes out that isn't by Nintendo.
The projection here. The projection is insane. This dude's been yelling about Elden Ring for over 2 years now. But the problem is that we just don't like Nintendo enough? That's the best you could do after all this time?
But because they have to like do it with everything that comes out. Like nothing ever becomes special. Nothing ever becomes popular. Nothing ever becomes iconic.
I'm so confused as to how your brain works. I just don't get it.
And Elden Ring will absolutely become another victim of this corrupt practice.
Oh, it's corrupt now. It's corrupt to like Elden Ring more than Nintendo. That's corrupt. Yeah, I'm honestly at a loss as to how to conclude this one. I just don't get it. I'm just not getting it. I'm not getting it. Toodles.